This is Chapter 2 of Glass Houses. This is the meeting that Marilyn is supposed to type. Classification: crypto. Meeting: National Security Council, April 27th, 6:35 p.m. President: Jack. Parker: Mr. President. Peabody: The agenda, Mr. President, the agenda we had, it was Russia. President: Russia? Peabody: Russia, Mr. President, it was the occupation, the policy. President: Yes, we have to. Dr. Wells, could you comment for us on the ramifications? My understanding is that we're still not anticipating any problems in Russia. In the main, we are not anticipating irrational responses in the constituted government there. Wells: Yes, sir, you are correct, Mr. President. Our projections, and this may be surprising, but we ran them through and this is the way it came out. Our projections still are. Now, we don't know how the Soviet Union is going to take this. We can't know exactly. But our projections are that after a certain point, let's say after they have agreed to capitulate, and this could very well be after, let's say, the bombing of some one of the cities, but we don't really expect to have to go that far because there will be a considerable amount of confusion after the detonations. Uh, Confusion. What I mean is that the effect will be similar to the large civilian casualty municipal damage, that syndrome, without the, that's even though our casualty figures, as we have noted, are even lower now, only 6 million deaths in Russia proper. Lincoln: That's with the Brookhaven projection. Well, yes, the Brookhaven projection. Most of those will be on-site workers, military personnel. There is one in the Urals near a tin mine. We will have some casualties there, some civilian casualties, and those by the Black Sea. That's not in Russia proper. President: 6 million? Did we decide? Well, I know that's low. That whole civil defense thing, that civil defense option they made is going to pay off. It's really going to pay off. Also, the word is that they are not going to be arming some of them that we had figured in. Porter: They will by Sunday. Wells: No, even after the ultimatum, we don't anticipate. The word is they will be mobilizing on the border, but they are not anticipating nuclear involvement. President: Well, naturally. Lanky: Naturally. Who would over this? Porter: It's not the 50s anymore. You can't expect. President: It can't be helped. Wells: Of course we could be wrong. When the device is activated, we could have warheads going off all over the place that we hadn't figured on. But our best information is now about 6 million in the USSR. Lanky: 6 million. We'll lose that many in Western Europe. Peabody: Can't be helped. Wells: The confusion, of course, is going to be all out of proportion to just those 6 million. All out of proportion. For one thing, the computer system will be shot to hell. President: They haven't got the one in Moscow working? Wells: No, not yet. And of course, like we said, their communications aren't built to handle the kind of a load this will put on them, so they won't be able to analyze the situation properly for a few days. If we send 101st into Moscow in a big show, like we said, I don't think they'll be able to respond. They will capitulate. Porter: Don't count on it. Wells: No, of course, but after they do capitulate, let's say after our coercive power has been demonstrated, and that could very well be directly after the detonations, if they take it as an assertion of unchallenged nuclear strength, I mean as a unilateral strength on our part. If they believe that there is no force that can challenge us on that level, then the Russians can be expected to cooperate fully. That is to say, that once they decide to cooperate at all, they will cooperate. Unintelligible. Our recommendation in regards to the administration of Russia is to keep as much of the leadership. Don't balkanize it. Don't split up. Gladstone. Now, wait a minute. Brown. I thought we settled. Gladstone. Wait just one little minute here. Just one little cotton picking minute. Don't split up. Are you saying don't split up Russia? Well, we can't. We need to keep Russia together to keep the peace. We can't. Gladstone. Bullshit. What is this? White. Are we talking about the Ukraine? I'm committed to a free Ukraine. Porter. We've been all over this before. Wells. I'm just saying we agreed. Yes, you can take like a piece off for Finland, maybe. Yes, we said Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. The Poles want a little piece of something. That whole Eastern Europe, but don't go too far. Don't balkanize it. White. I'm committed to the Ukraine. Wells. But don't go too far. That's what I'm saying. The Ukraine, maybe. But we ought to think twice about Georgia and Armenia, Kazakhstan, Turkestan. President. I see your point, Doc, but we've been over this. As a free country, a democratic country, we are committed. We have always been committed to the principle of self-rule. Gladstone. Damn right we have. We've been yakking all these years about lifting the Iron Curtain, taking the yoke off. Time's up. Gotta go shit or go blind. President. Finland. New borders for Finland. We're committed. Latvia. Lithuania, Estonia. Porter. There is a big Ukrainian lobby in this country. Wells. Ukraine, the Poles, but it's got to stop somewhere. There's Kazakhstan and the Uzbeks, the Tartars. They'll all go like a row of dominoes if we don't draw a line somewhere. President. I think we are committed. We've been committed from the beginning to a policy of big remains big. We want a stable political environment, stable borders for the unsatisfiable territory. Well, the whole goddamn Russia is unsatisfiable territory. President, but there's a lot of those little, we can always use partition. Partition hasn't been tried enough. Gladstone, wait a minute. President, and for the big countries, I mean, let's face facts. We can't allow Russia, for instance, Russia to keep her former power. Wells, now we're getting down to it. President, but not to emasculate her, Doc, just until she can no longer threaten. Gladstone, wait a minute. Wells, from the very beginning, the temptation was... President, but we don't want to balkanize her. Wells, to balkanize her, to take over, to take advantage of this opportunity to expand our borders, shall we say. Gladstone, wait a minute. Wells, to take over the world. President, no. Wells, and we all agreed we were better than that, so we agreed to limit our objectives. Don't mess with China. Porter, right. Wells, don't mess with Russia too much. Leave her a peacekeeping force. 50 divisions, as I recall. And then it got whittled down to 30 and 10. What will it be by Monday? President, for God's sake, Doc, we'll guarantee her borders. We said that. It's only temporary. Wells, she needs 30 divisions in the south alone. Russian divisions. Grass, the Tartars alone, they will fight. They're ready to fight. Porter, we could step in with a peacekeeping force of our own. Lanking, I thought we decided. Porter, a mobile force, a flexible. Lanking, I thought we decided on doing the whole thing from a nuclear stance. No ground commitments. No conventional ground commitments. Porter, to keep the peace. Lanking, hell, we don't need ground forces on this. We just tell them we're going to disarm you, both of you, you suckers. Start another war, we'll blow you to bits. Bollington, blow up a few cities. Lanking, yeah, blow up a few cities. We've got to keep away from domestic squabbles. We can't get an army mired over there. Price, we'll have trouble enough with China. Lanking, China we're just going to have to forget about. Price, they'll never knuckle under. Porter, seal her off and forget her. Grass, I don't understand this mania for blowing up the cities, and China is a prime example. What the hell good do you think it's going to do there? Lanking, but in the industrial nations, we were talking about the industrialized nations, Porter, that have a vulnerability. I think we agreed that Russia will never stand for her cities being bombed. Lanking, civil defense notwithstanding. Porter, she'll knuckle under. Lanking, as long as we move in right away, don't give her time to think about it. Move in while the communications are still in chaos. President, look, Doc, we have the broad lines, the broad policy base that we will use for our, but like we said, we will have to remain flexible. Wells, Mr. President, the temptations have always been, the temptation will be to chip away. President, we've got that bottom line. I mean, we have to have a plan of action for the first day, and we have to move decisively then while we can and get everything done we can to take advantage of any slow responses we might get. And maybe we'll end up, it's the American people will demand. Price, demand. President, sticking to what's compatible with, but don't worry. The bottom line is big remains big. That's the bottom line. Viable political entities. Gladstone, Mr. President, may I just ask a question? President Archie. Gladstone, Mr. President, I think I missed something here. Maybe I missed one of the meetings, or maybe I fell asleep. Laughter. Something must have happened to give me amnesia because I just don't remember when it was we decided to leave Russia intact. President, we didn't. Gladstone, don't balkanize it, he says. And why not? What would be so bad about those little bitty countries getting their independence? Everybody's so goddamn afraid that some little country is going to get away with making its own decisions. The trouble with the Balkans is that they didn't go far enough. What those bastards really want is self-rule. Why not give it to them? Wells, Mr. Vice President. President Archie. Gladstone, why not let the enslaved peoples go? Or would that be too American for you? President Archie, we've been all over this. We agreed to let the Western Soviet republics out. Secretary Wells is talking about regions that have such complex internal politics we just can't. Gladstone, Mr. President, you're talking about using American troops to put down rebellions in those regions. President Archie, if we don't leave the Russians' troops to do it themselves, we have to. Gladstone, that's American lives you're talking about spending, American lives to help Russia keep her power over those people. That doesn't go down well with me. President, well, we've been over it, and it's coming up to the wire, and I think it's time we settle this thing so we can go on. We haven't got time to keep quibbling over these issues. Can I have a show of support for big remains big? Gladstone, you're nothing but a commie liberal do-gooder pinko. Wells, Mr. Vice President. President, come on, Archie. Gladstone, and that whole Harvard crowd, tough guys, huh? Read a lot of books, and now you're going to show us how to rule a fucking world. President, can I see a show of support for big remains big? Is it unanimous? Gladstone, all right. President, unanimous, show unanimous, thank you. Now, the agenda. Peabody, Mr. President, it's 6:45 and you have an appearance at 7. President said, oh, for the kids. Peabody, yes. President, well, what was supposed to be next? Peabody, news releases. President, you mean for Monday? Peabody, yes, pre-taped news releases, Peace Day news releases. President, I thought those had been worked out. Peabody, yes, well, they need to be approved. President, we'll take that up when we meet back here. What time? Peabody, in the morning, 9 o'clock. President, 9 o'clock. We'll meet you back here at 9 o'clock and we'll just continue through the agenda. Gentlemen, the meeting over, the important men dispersed, the corridors darkened. Marilyn sat trimly at her desk so nobody would notice her predicament through the glass windows of her office, her back straight and unmoving, 1 foot half out of its $60 vellum shoe, her fingers fluttering smoothly over the keyboard as in a complex caress, never hesitating, never making mistakes. Her sorrow spilled hotly through the cracks of her closed eyes, gathering first like quicksilver balls around her lashes, and then dripping down her cheeks, following the curve of her neck and her shoulder blade until they found the thin, soft dress. The voices murmured endlessly through the tiny microphone into her ear, their rhythms crisp and controlled, making no concessions to her tears or the tears of any of the people of the world. Her fingers stayed at the keyboard, even though the tears tickled her neck. When she felt the sadness begin to dry up, she planned to blot the wetness away with a Kleenex. But if she kept rubbing and wiping now, she'd smear her mascara for sure. They were simply sad tears, an unclogging of some complex stuffiness composed not only of incomprehensible facts, but of an incoherent residue of the mistake she'd made today, the feeling she had not allowed herself to suffer. But at the core of them was the fear that the Yeti wasn't ever going to be happy after all. There wasn't going to be world peace after all. She was almost finished with the transcript when Wells appeared at her door. She suddenly felt at least as foolish as she knew she looked. The tears had been an indulgence. She had been allowing herself more and more lately, taking longer coffee breaks, staring at the glass wall of the Yeti's run when she wasn't in the mood to work, and now allowing herself the luxury of a cry while she was on a rush job. She was bound to have gotten caught. It was a wonder it hadn't happened sooner. She hurriedly grabbed a handful of Kleenex and put it to her face. Excuse me, she said. I got something in my eye. She knew what her face must look like. She peeked at him. A kind of amused little smile cracked through the dried mucus in the corners of his mouth. Hi, she said brightly. Brought you something, he said. From Bonzo. They said he left it on the floor of the playroom. He stretched out his hand towards her, and across it was a loop of moss. Oh, she said, and the tears were then unstoppable. He said, I'm sorry if I... Her legs were weak. She sat back down in her chair and put her arms around his big, scratchy stomach, leaning her face against the roughness of his belt. She knew he was at least 8 inches shorter than she was, but standing next to her chair that way, he seemed large and comforting, like a father. Then, after a moment, she was sharply embarrassed by her display and pulled demurely back from him. But it was too late. He stood beside her, his breath half drawn in, as if he were about to say something. He still had her hand trapped in his. The moment stretched out. Her own long, soft fingers, just under the top sheet of skin was a tender pink glow, trembled lightly on the dry furrows of his hand. She felt a shiver go through him. Something juicy in her own belly flipped over once, down into her groin, just once. She hardly dared breathe. He was standing between her and the window, and no one could see what was happening, even if they had walked by and looked in. But she was very conscious of the possibility that someone might come. Her muscles tensed, ready to jump away at the first shadow of movement in the hall. He stood very still, as if he was afraid that any direction he was capable of starting would move him away from her. Marilyn liked the look of her skin against his. She loved her body. It was full of life all over it, full of health. Every cell on her skin was alive. But in him, she saw another sort of mirror, even more exciting in its way. His body had been tormented, driven, used up. Such sorrow and pain. She thought he might be trembling inside like she was. Underneath his wrinkled suit, his skin would be pallid and clammy, like an old man's. She thought about the salmons, torn, ravaged by the fight to return to the beginning so they could mate and die. Oh, you've seen war, she thought. You've seen Stalin. Sickness and power. These two had eaten at this man. His eyes swam in yellow mucus. His breath labored through the folds of his interior, seeping back out of him in a medley of thin whistles. But his sallow flesh was dignified by its past. He had had a distinguished career. He had many times made decisions that actually meant something, that actually changed things. He pulled her arms again around his stocky body. Her cheek was pressed again on his scratchy stomach. She could feel the safety pin with which he held up his pants against her skin. And then he put his hand on her shoulder, and she was stuck. She couldn't move away from him now without seeming to reject him. But she didn't want this to be happening. On the one hand, when she moved away from him, she wanted it to be subtly, so not to blemish the scenario for him. But on the other hand, her subtle effort to ease away seemed to him to be the beginning of a new rhythm, like the first ripple on a still pond when a stone is thrown in, the first beginnings of the rocking waves on a sea. So she sat absolutely still. The moments stretched out, and still his hand pressed urgently against her shoulder. Her nose began to itch, but she made herself keep still. Soon her left shoulder blade was itching. She tried to remember what Marcia had said about itches. Marcia was into yoga. Sitting so still had made her begin to sweat under her stockings, and she knew in another minute she would itch all over. But she didn't want to move away. Every instant longer she let it become made it that much more a whole experience for him. It was the tension of sitting so still that was making her itch. Her ears began to buzz as if she had shells up against them. But every time she started to ease away from him, he took it as an escalation of love-making and held her more tightly. She knew she'd have marks on her cheek from his pants. Jesus. Then suddenly there was a flurry of confusion, and it was difficult for her to sort things out. Wells's voice was booming over her. "Oh, Peabody, look here, Peabody, have you seen? Marilyn was just looking for Marilyn. Yes, Jason, my boy, yes, sir." She had squealed before she knew what she was crying for. Her head was caught, and his hands were flying about roughly. But she was, after all, trained to be efficient, and it was only a moment before she had diagnosed what was wrong. Her hair was caught in his zipper. "Are you just about done with that transcript?" That was Jace, all right. He was in the room. She could hear something strange in his voice. She hoped it was suppressed laughter. "It'll be about 10 minutes," she said. Her fingers flew expertly around the zipper, but Wells wouldn't stand still. He tried to jerk away prematurely, and she, surprised at her own strength, grabbed his pants and held him with one hand while she worked at the tangle with the other. It was only another moment before she was free, but Jace had already disappeared. Into his office? She couldn't tell. "Oh, God," she said. What did you do that for? What do you think? Do you think I like to be made a fool of? She looked at Wells in surprise. His pale, flat face was quivering in rage. His eyes burned yellow. His voice was terrifying. A moment ago he had been vulnerable and she had felt she could manipulate him, soothe him, but now his anger had transformed him back into the man everybody respected. He felt her feel clumsy and appalled. Why didn't you move away from me? Or maybe you enjoy scenes like this. Maybe this was all a setup, huh? I, my hair was caught. I didn't mean. You didn't mean. I wasn't thinking. It hurt when you pulled, and I. Sometimes one has to learn to endure the little twinges. It would have undone my hairdo. Sometimes one even has to learn to live with hairs out of place. She put the microphone back to her ear and pressed the control for the tape with her toe. But his voice came in on her anyway to the edge of her mind, behind the flow of voices in her ear. You're really a Marilyn, is it? What disturbs me is why did I let myself get drawn into it? I'm sorry for you, you know that, but there's only so much. I admit I find you kind of pathetic. You used what little, and here he waved his hand limply, clearly meaning her looks, what God gave you, and I admire that. The horrible feeling went down her arms and into her legs. She couldn't think of what to say back to him. She tried to pretend she couldn't hear him with the tape going in her ear. Something about your native sort of instinctive vulgarity caught my. It seemed refreshing. You see, it was my fault. But you know all that, don't you? It's racking, racking. A man has to hang on to his self respect, has to. I feel dirtied. I feel like an animal. She finished the transcript and wheeled her chair around, scooching to the Xerox machine still in it. Her legs felt tingly and awful, and she didn't feel like standing up. The machine whipped out the copies while he stood over her, his foul breath too near her. She handed him his, neatly collated and stapled. You'll have to sign for it, she said. Oh. He was suddenly cooperative, conciliatory. The muscles in his face slackened, and his eyes got their sad color back, damp and sorry. She walked briskly away from him and delivered the rest of the copies to security, all but one. She felt a little tingly thrill in her spine that got worse as she got closer to having to face that one. What if Jason was still in his office? But there wasn't any way around it. If she didn't try his door, and he was in there, it would be obvious that she didn't have the nerve to face him. Maybe he had seen the humor in the situation, but his office was dark. His desk was polished and bare. He sat in his black leather chair, the glow coming in on him from the Yeti's run. He didn't move or make any sign that he noticed when Marilyn stood by his desk. You'll have to sign for this, she said finally. He whipped around without looking at her. The way he did it, she could tell he had known when she came in, and signed her clipboard briskly. She knew she should set the transcript on his desk and leave while she had the chance. It was perfectly clear that he was going to make a scene. It would have been easier to deal with him in an adult manner after she had had her dinner. His face was pale, the skin tight around his lips, dark under his eyes and at the temples, like an abused child. She tried to make herself feel sorry for him, but she was too angry. This was too much an indulgence on his part to look so hurt over a silly mistake. His posture, everything about him was calculated to arouse her compassion, and she knew nearly anybody else in the world would have been very worried about him. She put on a concerned face, but underneath it she was cold and rebellious. Could this be soft-hearted Marilyn who secretly mocked this tragic broken man? She scolded herself, forced herself to see his pain. The process was similar to the one she had used as a child to attain awe in church. Poor Jason, she said. What's the matter? Honey, you look tired. I'll get over it, he said. Okay, she said, retreating. I don't have any rights over you. I haven't earned any. I wouldn't want to tie you down to me. I don't have anything to offer you. I just wish you hadn't chosen to. He looked up at her pathetically, his face streaked with red marks from his fingers in his passion. Why did it have to be him? Doc? She asked in surprise. You mean you don't like Dr. Wells? I've been waiting for this, he said. I knew it couldn't last. I knew I wouldn't be able to hold you. Why should you be faithful to me? So I prepared myself, watching, waiting, wondering who it would be. When the time came that she needed to break loose from this destructive, self-defeating relationship, and I don't deny it, Marilyn, I know I haven't been easy to deal with, I kept asking myself, who would it be? Would it be somebody worthy of her? There are so many men who can offer you things I can't offer, things I'm not free to offer. Who would it be? What have you got against Dr. Wells? She asked. So, he cried, his voice cracking in his excitement. You admit it. I didn't think it would be that easy. What? She said. No, you don't understand. It was all a mistake. Did you think that Dr. Wells and I... You see, I was reaching into my files for something and he was leaning over to help me and... Really, Marilyn, it's true, and I got my hair caught, and it was the sort of thing you would think was funny if you had any sense of humor at all. Marilyn, stop. I can't stand it. You never believed me. I should have known you wouldn't believe anything I said. What's the use? Don't ever try to lie, Marilyn. I can see right through you. I can always tell when you're lying. How? She leaned slightly towards him to be sure and catch his answer, but his wisdom was disappointing. You're not crying. If you were telling the truth, you'd be crying. What a stupid thing to say. You always cry when you break down and tell me the truth, Marilyn. You're the most transparent person I've ever met in my life. She was absolutely cold now. Was this man her lover? His face was haggard. He was trying to keep her by hurting her back. His hands twitched, wanting to hit her, to cling to her. She felt trapped. Why don't you go home to your wife? She said. There's no way to talk to you, Marilyn, he said. You are inaccessible, completely inaccessible. He picked up his briefcase, which had been sitting all the time in the shadows beside his desk. What have you got against Dr. Wells? She said. He's a prissy-ass faggot. Jason had left the room, closing the door behind him, before she could think of what to say next. The perverse tears threatened to come again at last. Too late. She dabbed at them with a Kleenex from inside her bra. I'm crying, she called at the door. Does that mean I'm telling the truth? But there was no answer, only the swishing of the Yeti somewhere. She sat in his chair. It was still warm from him. The office was pleasantly shadowed, like a psychiatrist's office. The leather top of the desk felt expensive under her fingers. It wasn't until she stood up to go that she really understood that the transcript was still sitting on the desk where he had left it. The significance of this swept across her, making her realize that she was tired, and she sat back down again to think it over. Once he'd signed for it, Jason's copy of the transcript was no longer her responsibility. But she didn't leave something like that just lying around on top of a desk, even in the grotto. It would have to be locked up somewhere, but where? She couldn't get into his safe. She could put it in hers, but then he couldn't get it out without her being present or without going through the rigmarole of security. She knew he must need to go over it tonight. Why else would he have stayed in the grotto when he was late to Olivia's? She considered delivering it to his home, but discarded that idea as a quick vision of Jace's wife standing in a bright doorway snapped across her mind. Leave it with security? It would be a hassle for him. She knew what she had to do. She just hadn't wanted to face it. Jace couldn't afford to cut Olivia's party. He would show up, even if it was only for 10 minutes. She had to go to the party herself, alone, with the transcript in her purse and slip it to him as he left. This was how Marilyn Potter, a formerly nice little girl from Casper, Wyoming, happened to leave the White House shortly after 10 o'clock on April 27th with the transcript of a top secret meeting of the National Security Council tucked into her purse.